Okay, so I think we'll get started as we've got a fairly packed agenda for this morning's webinar. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the call today. I'm Chris Hobbs, professor in the War Studies Department here at King's and co-director of the Center for Science and Security Studies. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this panel discussion today on insider threats and security culture. Before we begin, there are just a few housekeeping points. When joining the internet link, you'll have been given the option of joining through your computer's audio or dialing in via telephone. If you have any difficulties connecting to the audio, please message the Center for Science and Security Studies host using the chat box. On a PC or laptop, the chat box is to the right-hand side. If you're using a phone or tablet, you will have to toggle to see it. To manage the session, we're going to be using one-way audio. All participants are currently muted, so if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box that you'll see on your Zoom application. If you're using a PC or laptop, the Q&A button is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And if you're using a smartphone or tablet, you may have to toggle to find this. Why not take a quick look now to see if you can locate it? So today's session differs from some of the previous webinars that we've been running through the UK's Nuclear Security Culture Programme, in that it's a panel discussion. One of the feedbacks that we had from our webinar series last year was to have more interaction and different perspectives from different panelists. And as such, we put this panel together, and hopefully it's going to be an interesting discussion. So in terms of the webinar, we're going to have three parts. After this brief introduction, I'll just introduce our excellent speakers, who will each speak for 5 to 10 minutes on topics that encompass vetting, human reliability, leadership, insider threats, and nuclear security culture. And we'll then go into a discussion where we'll invite you, the audience, to submit questions via the Q&A button. And potentially, if the connections allow, we'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly. Failing that, we can read the questions out on your behalf. Also, just to note, this session is recorded and will be available for viewing after it's completed on the CSSS YouTube panel. And at the end of the session, there will also be a short questionnaire for your feedback. We're experimenting here with a new format, so again, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the webinar. Now, without further delay, I'm pleased to announce that we're joined by 4 very experienced speakers that have done a lot of work on these different topics. We're going to be starting with Dr. Christine Noonan, who's a social scientist at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in the United States. She's done a lot of work on insider threat issues and leads a group of threat analysts, polygraph examiners, and support specialists who provide expertise in determining the credibility and seriousness of threats to national security assets. She's also an active member of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, and she's got a doctorate in law and policy from Northeastern University. We'll then have Mr. Kai Rule from Indonesia. So he's the Senior Nuclear Security Officer at the Center for Informatics and Nuclear Strategic Area Utilization at the National Nuclear Energy Agency of Indonesia, known as BATAN. He's done a lot of work, in particular on the topic of nuclear security culture. He's been an invited speaker on multiple IEA missions, including IPAS missions, and he spent a lot of work with the IEA developing their guidance on the self-assessment of nuclear security culture. Our third speaker will be Cheryl Homer. She's the Safety, Security and Environment Directorate Manager at Nuclear Transport Solutions, NTS, which until recently was INS. So international, I'm forgetting it myself now. So anyway, NTS at the moment. And Cheryl's worked in the nuclear industry for 17, 18 years before joining INS in late 2007 from the British Nuclear Group. And then finally, we've got George Foster. Following military service, George took up the first role as Director of Security at the Dunray Site Restoration Limited in Scotland. And in this role, he's responsible for all aspects of enterprise-wide security delivered, including the protection of nuclear material, its transshipment nationally and internationally, and the protection of nuclear sensitive information. George is also one of our partners on the Nuclear Security Culture Programme through his company, Amport Risk Limited, and has done a lot of work with us over the last 3 years on these topics. And with that, we'll move on to the first speaker, and I'll just bring up the presentation deck. Okay, so yeah, those are our 4 panelists. So we started with Christine, then going on to Kyrol, and then to Cheryl, and finishing with George. So Christine, following that brief introduction, pass over to you to give your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chris. There's a growing body of research on insider threat. This is a topic that impacts all organizations and industries. Insider threat events may occur infrequently. However, when they do, there's potential for huge consequence. Next slide, please. The definition continues to evolve based on current events. And there is a current trend towards using the phrase insider risk. In general, there's a lack of academic and practitioner agreement on definitions. And this is the definition I use on a regular basis. An insider threat is generally defined as a trusted current or former employee, contractor, or other business partner who has or had authorized access to an organization's network, system, or data, or materials, and intentionally or unintentionally misuse that access to negatively affect the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the organization's information systems, or materials protections, controls, and inventory levels. Insider threats can take many forms and are often carried out through abuse of access rights, theft of material, and mishandling physical devices. It should be noted that insider motivations vary. Insiders can be passive or active, violent or nonviolent. And these kinds of threats can result in a host of negative impacts to organizations. Organizational approaches for mitigating insider threats can, and at a very high level, be categorized into 2 categories. Next slide, please. These categories are administrative policies and prevention, and leadership and culture. Throughout the employee life cycle, seen here in 6 stages: attraction, recruitment, onboarding, development, retention, and then separation, the organization can draw upon a variety of tools and techniques to first minimize the likelihood of insider threats and counterproductive workplace behaviors. Second, recognize when an individual may need assistance and respond appropriately. Third, these can strengthen the employee-employer relationship. The first group of examples establishes expectations and are used to shape and control behaviors. For example, credibility assessment or trustworthiness assessment helps us understand the confidence we have in an individual based on his or her character. Background checks and vetting allow us to investigate whether the right individual is selected for the right position. Human reliability programs combine credibility, reliability, and physical and mental suitability. In many organizations, this is also done on a variety of different occasions throughout the employee life cycle as a form of continuous evaluation. Policies and procedures provide guidelines for decision-making processes and the way that work in an organization should be carried out. Behavioral observation allows us to detect behaviors or activities that may constitute an unreasonable risk. Training and education allows us to work with individuals so they know and can adhere to established security and safety rules. And finally, employee assistance is a work-based intervention program designed to assist employees in resolving personal problems that may adversely affect an employee's performance. The second group of examples serve to reinforce expectations and provide guidance. Model behavior and expectations really focus on how people learn within a social setting. Part of what we learn comes from watching others and imitating that behavior. Strong leaders realize the importance of modeling. Consistency, communication, commitment, transparency, and integrity all lead to some of this modeled behavior. Engagement, the extent to which employees feel passionate about their jobs, are committed to the organization, and put work first. Recognition and feedback allows employees to feel valued and appreciated. Services and benefits are those perks of the job or benefits in kind, which can be used to help instill loyalty and indicates that an employer cares for employee well-being. Employees also need to feel like they belong, their unique contributions and abilities valued. Vision of an organization helps establish a company's purpose, what they're striving for, and what they want to achieve. Values go hand in hand, and values express the ethics that guide behavior within an organization. Finally, the psychological contract represents the unwritten mutual beliefs, perceptions, and informal expectations between an employer and an employee. Effective insider threat mitigation should account for the whole person. What do I mean by that? Well, what happens at home comes to work, and what happens at work is taken home. Interpersonal and organizational stressors are intimately connected, and this is especially true in highly stressful times, such as the global pandemic. The organization plays a tremendously important role in mitigating insider threats. Collectively, these policies, procedures, and attributes of positive organizational culture described can help us establish and maintain trust between the employee and the employer, define workplace expectations, and shape and reinforce norms and behavior throughout the employee's life cycle. Thanks, Chris.
Great, thanks, and very much, Chrissy. And if you've got questions for Chrissy, do pop them in the Q&A box, and we're going to return to those after all the panelists have had a chance to speak. Okay, so moving on to Khairul. Khairul, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chris. I will share you my. Okay.
Do you want me to put it on this slide?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Good afternoon and good morning for everyone. My speech today is about lesson learned of HRP implementation, the challenges and opportunity that we did in Batam Serpong. So I will start about the national legal framework related for nuclear security that we have in Indonesia. We have a government regulation number 54, 2012 that stipulates us as the licenses to implement a human reliability program, and also government regulation number 33, 2007, and Bapeten Chairman regulation number 1, 2009 on the physical protection, that legitimation and trustworthiness that need to be implemented, and also Bapeten Chairman number 6, 2015 regarding for security of radioactive sources. So this kind of the regulation that we have in Indonesia to implement a trustworthiness program and also HRP. So when we see the recommendation of the INVISIC 225 Rep 5 about the trustworthiness, unauthorized access for nuclear material category 1 and 2, that's mentioned only authorized person to have access to the protected area. Person authorized and unescorted access should limited to person whose trustworthiness has been determined. So for the sabotage is also the same, that only authorized person should have access to a protected area. So talking about HRP, in 2013, we held a workshop on insider threat mitigation and nuclear security culture that supported by DEC at the time. DEC is the Department of Energy and Climate Change, now based, and together with the Department of State through Partners for Nuclear Security. So we did in 2013, then we developed also in 2014, after some of the high level received the knowledge about the HRP delivered by PNS and DEC experts. And also we got several workshops related for the HRP program, such as interview technique and drug testing. And also finally, we got a 2018 workshop regarding behavior of observation. You know, we in Indonesia, I mean in Batam, as a government employee, the first recruitment program is to check the background check through the police, criminal record, and so on. So that's only for the first time when we apply to be a Batam employee or government employee. So during the workshop, we realized that we have to implement HRP program for entire workforce, and for that, based on that workshop in 2013 and 2014, we are trying to implement in our CET, Center of Educational Training, for the first trial, and then we continue 2016 in our research reactor. We target audience is a certain person in that facility. So HRP in Batam culture is synergized with the safety and security culture, and then we have to work together with HRP team. So we also follow the IAEA Nuclear Security Series number 8G about preventive and protective measure against insider threat. So this kind of the reference that we use in Batam right now. So for your information, the HRP definition is a security and safety reliability program designed to ensure that individuals who occupy position with access to certain nuclear materials, facilities, and program meets the highest standard that we need in our organization. So reliability means that an individual ability to adhere to security and safety rule and regulation, doing the right thing in the right way at the right time. So trustworthiness is confidence in an individual based on her character, reliance on the character, strength, faith, or confidence in an individual. So we also approach physical and mental suitability. So the role of leader in this HRP is to fulfill the rule of and benefit of HRP is to fulfill a reliable and trustworthiness personnel to comply with the standard of nuclear industry. So to ensure personnel work safely and securely, and to create a positive and conducive working environment, and to promote the achievement of job satisfaction. So identify potential problem and strengthening the implementation of security and safety culture as well, and to improve the national security and safety system. So that's kind of the role and benefit of HRP. Now we talk about what is the role of leadership. So we need a directive letter for establishing HRP team to set up the HRP organization that we got a couple of years ago. And we set up an executive committee, a stakeholder, and then we implement HRP trial in Center for Educational and Training, and also in the research reactor located in Serpong. So the leader is support to implement HRP for new employee as well. So for your information, 1 decade, 10 years ago, the government did not recruit new employees. So since 2018, we have a new employees in Batam. So that's our target audience to introduce the HRP for the new employee as well. So future plan is to support implementation of HRP for the entire workforce in Batam organization, about 2,800 employees. So we got Batam HRP organization, advisory by Executive Secretary of Batam, and also we provide some background check for HRP new employees. There are several questionnaires that we provided, such as loyalty and competence, and other related for what you call it, ideology and nuclear safety and nuclear security, financial responsibility, honesty behavior, criminal act, and social responsibility, emotional social stability. So this kind of the questionnaire we provide in our HRP for the new employee. That also next we can provide also for the all employee. So that's kind of the HRP implement in Batam. What is the next step? We need to conduct the trainer for the instructor HRP in Batam, and maybe it's a good idea by visiting, observe, and study HRP implementation in real condition at nuclear power plant and other institutions that we have that may have mature of its implementation. So that kind of the HRP implementation and challenges that we have now in Batam. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Chris.
Great, thanks very much, Khairul. Again, any questions for Khairul, do pop it in the Q&A and we'll come back to it at the end in the discussion. And now we're going to pass over to Cheryl Homer from NTS. Cheryl, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to have been given the opportunity today to speak to you about vetting human reliability programs and the importance of leadership. Could I have the first slide, please, Chris? Okay. So firstly, we should establish the relationship and the difference between nuclear security culture and safety. Nuclear safety culture is defined as the assembly of characteristics and attitudes in organisations and individuals, which establishes that as an overriding priority, protection and safety issues receive the attention warranted by their significance. It considers the risks of inadvertent human error and deliberate acts that could cause harm, whereas nuclear security culture is defined as the assembly of characteristics, attitudes and behaviour of individuals, organisations and institutions which serve as a means to support and enhance nuclear security. This focuses on the mitigation of malicious actions relating to the theft and sabotage of nuclear material or other related material, and to a lesser extent on performance failings or inadvertent human error. This leads me nicely onto the role of vetting human reliability programs and leadership and how they play in shaping an organisation's nuclear security culture. Personnel security comprises the policies and procedures involved in deciding an individual's suitability to hold employment in a given role and their continued suitability, also known as aftercare. This in turn aims to mitigate the risk of employees and contractors in exploiting their legitimate access to the organisation's assets for unauthorised purposes. When managed effectively, organisations are able to shape and control their working environment in order to promote vigilance and establish an effective security culture, which in turn influences and deters those seeking to cause harm. Providing guidance on good security behaviour, addressing concerns appropriately, offering various support mechanisms, having security policies and practices in place that are accessible and transparent, and also having security awareness training will ensure all employees are treated fairly. In terms of HRP, the objective is to encourage and embed an organisational culture that integrates safety and security in a mutually supporting manner. This is a common objective of eliminating risk. One way we do this within nuclear transport solutions is by rolling out an annual security education awareness programme. This educates staff on current threats to the nuclear industry and provides awareness, tools and techniques to essentially mitigate those risks. The end result is being an organisational culture that recognises and promotes the importance of safety and security, which is reflected in the positive changes in behaviours. In addition, we also ensure employees have the necessary skills and experience to be able to carry out their role effectively. In terms of leadership, commitment from senior management is vital in order to demonstrate the value placed on security. Their buy-in and support may be crucial to securing the necessary resources to maintain or improve security within the organisation. Top-down implementation is likely to promote compliance and consistency across all employees across the organisation. Conversely, a lack of awareness of security threat at the senior level can undermine the process. Inadequate corporate governance and unclear policies in managing people risk and strengthening compliance can also make it difficult to detect and prevent insider activity. In order to mitigate this risk, we have appointed key individuals, which include Senior Information Risk Owner, an Information Governance Officer, and Senior Security Delivery Managers in order to ensure that these issues receive the attention and investment required. In order to put this into context, a recent example whereby leadership played a key role was during the pandemic, and we issued specific guidance around insider threat. After all, effective personnel security is dependent on the support of our managers, as they are often well placed to be aware of any circumstances or behaviours which may make an individual susceptible to pressure or improper implements. It should be recognised that all individuals can be vulnerable to circumstances that might compromise their attitudes and behaviours, regardless of their professional standing and previous reliability. It can be a result of a wide range of life events, from stressful, personal or working circumstances. During the pandemic, you'll appreciate there's been a number of disruptions to our normal working life, such as adopting working from home practices, increased care and responsibilities, concerns for others. You may have family members that have lost their job, friends that are going through difficult times. People have been dealing, unfortunately, with members that have been ill, bereaved. There's been added pressure to find that work-life balance. We wanted to stress to managers that it's important for them to recognise that individuals may be feeling anxious, worried, unsettled, and under additional pressures, and that we as an organisation have a number of resources available. All the above disruptions could result in existing employees being an unwitting insider by breaching our security policies, procedures, without intentionally meaning to do harm, for example, opening a phishing email. On the other side, you could have existing employees, could be self-initiating an insider act for their own benefit as a result of feeling isolated, cut off from the team, or having a reduced workload and no support. Line manager oversight can enable an opportunistic insider to exploit that access to valuable assets, because the early signs of counterproductive workplace behaviour are not spotted and acted upon. Line managers play a key role in continuing to support the security culture we have in place, as this provides deterrence to insider activity by ensuring employees have a good level of awareness, so are less likely to become unwitting insiders and understand how to report concerns where they notice workplace behaviour. Could you have the next slide, please, Chris? So in summary, employees who behave in the right way, even when no one is looking, contribute to good security. A strong security culture with clear personal accountability and a mature understanding of managing risk, responsibility and reputation will allow NTS to function most effectively. The benefits of having an effective security and culture include engaged employees who take responsibility for security issues, risk of security breaches, incidents is reduced by encouraging employees to think and act in a more security conscious way. We have improved organisational performance through effective management, increased employee satisfaction and commitment to the organisation, and the risk of reputational and financial damage to the organisation is reduced. In order to achieve this, the HRP is key and will build on our security culture and ensuring clear policies and procedures are in place. Staff surveys are issued to determine current attitudes and monitor changing trends and behaviours over time. Training and awareness provide excellent opportunities to ensure that employees are equipped with the required skills to perform their security responsibilities effectively. An established programme will ensure continuous development in this area. I appreciate personnel security management will vary between organisations, however the key principles remain in terms of identifying the risk, putting in place mitigating factors which are efficient and cost effective. Commitment is crucial from all within the organisation and is only gained if leadership believe and live the values and behaviours and filter this down to their expected. Will also help to strengthen the security culture across the organisation. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Cheryl. And again, any questions for Cheryl, do pop them in the Q&A and we'll come back to them in just a moment. But before we do that, it's my pleasure to hand over to our fourth speaker, George Foster from Amport Risk. George, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody else. And welcome to all the participants. But in particular, I'm going to give a shout out to Ebby Furo. Nice to see you there, Ebby. And we'll be in touch, I'm sure, in the future, as you know. But it's good to see you there. And indeed, everybody else on the participants list who I know, we know each other. What I'm going to do now is try and draw some of these threads together because vetting, insider threat, leadership, security culture, pardon me, human reliability programs, they all fit within a framework. And what I'm going to try and do is draw some connections, some relationships, and some context between all these things. And then as I bring it to a close is try and offer a framework of understanding and perhaps application in an organization. And the first thing I'll say is that vetting and human reliability programs are two scalable elements with limited elements of a broader context. They can, of course, be part of an insider threat mitigation program, but they are orientated towards insider threats. But there are some common aspects between vetting and human reliability programs. One is that they're about trust, ultimately trust in the workplace and the reliability which engenders and promotes trust. The other common aspect is that they should be subjected to a graded approach in the way in which they are applied. And in that I mean, because they're about determining reliability for access, and that is access in terms of physical access to materials perhaps, or material stores, or to sensitive nuclear information. Not everybody requires the same access, and therefore access should be graded and determined on that basis on who needs to be vetted and how intrusive a human reliability program should be, or indeed a comprehensive aftercare program. The other aspect about that is that, and the common aspect between vetting and human reliability programs, is that issue of assets. And it's about determining the first point in a vulnerability assessment, determining the criticality of the assets and who needs access to them. What that effectively means is that the more people you give access to assets, be they information assets or physical assets, the greater the vulnerabilities that one introduces. And so it's a balance to be achieved on a basis of a graded approach on who needs that access. And it is literally about their roles and responsibilities. And that access needs to be written into those roles and responsibilities. At the site I was the Director of Security of, a Category 1 civil nuclear site in the UK, at one stage I found out that 10% of the workforce was security vetted to the highest security level. And that was far too high. It probably should have been around about 2 or 3%, maybe 4%. But what it promoted and instigated was a complete review of who held the highest security vetting access rights in an attempt for us to drive that down. And that was an issue about access. It was also an issue about cost, because vetting costs a lot of money. And it was an issue about introducing additional vulnerabilities, because the people who didn't need access but had the ability to gain it through their authorized legitimate access, and indeed had the ability to discuss matters associated with that, meant that they introduced a vulnerability if they did not need to have access or didn't need to discuss those matters. So a graded approach is important there, and it's a common aspect of it. That bit about the graded approach and determining the criticality of assets and who needs access to them points to the wider requirement to conduct a vulnerability assessment process. And it's exactly the same as if one was looking at protecting a vital area or stores or waste storage or anything like that, is we need to treat access, the insider threat, in exactly the same way and use exactly the same principles and processes. So some of the connections there are evident, and they are scalable in the sense that they're graded. I want to bring in the issue of leadership now. Leadership has an impact because it's about influencing people and change through behaviors and through the demonstration of the values and beliefs in the workforce. But leadership's about taking responsibility, it's about applying authority, and it's about being held accountable. And if those three things, those three aspects of leadership are conducted, well, then one would expect in culture terms and in the way in which leadership influences behaviors to actually have a proper human reliability program, which is graded and thought through based upon the vulnerabilities and access needed, a proper vetting program, which only vets those people who need to be vetted to give them authorized and legitimate access. And then the culture which surrounds that in terms of the way that people behave, which empowers the workforce and employees and contractors to call out areas of concern in terms of insider threat, vetting, or human reliability programs. Next slide, please, Chris. And what this brings together is the possibility of looking at the framework of this, because it's not just about vetting, which can be intrusive, and not everybody wants to be vetted, despite the fact they might want access in terms of their role responsibilities. And it's not just about how vetting fits into a human reliability program in terms of pre-employment or post or during employment, for example. It's about how it all fits together and the influence that leadership and nuclear security culture has on that. And there's a programmatic aspect of that, which is that implies a comprehensive approach to it. And this is just a framework. It's not necessarily comprehensive. It's not necessarily the be all and the end all, but it is perhaps a way of looking at it because it looks at the assets in terms of knowing one's assets and how important, how critical they are, where the vulnerabilities exist and who needs access. It looks at our people and the way they behave, which you can take into a human reliability program in its broadest sense. And then it looks at the measures that need to be put in place in terms of mitigation, and those are the preventive and protective measures, which themselves are elaborated through policies, procedures, arrangements, and critically assurance. None of those things, of course, will hang together or will work efficiently and effectively without leadership and without a security culture which is strong and robust. But the most important element of all of that is not necessarily the security culture, in my view, but it's the leadership aspect of it. And by that, I mean good leadership. I don't just mean leadership per se. Leadership can be corrosive and poor leadership, but it's critical it needs to be good leadership because leaders need to reinforce the values and beliefs of the organization as stated in their policies. And they need to demonstrate good behaviors because the relationship between leaders and the people that follow them, their followers, is that followers do take the line that leaders, good leaders, offer if they believe in them and if they trust them. And so you look at that in a comprehensive framework, perhaps offered as something like this, which needs to be cross-organizational, so it's integrated and embedded in all the other decision-making structures of the organization, supported from the top by leadership in terms of the demonstration of their values, beliefs, and behaviors, and then integrated. So, for example, integrated into the organizational risk register so that all the activities can be coordinated together. And so the impact of one activity is understood on another area. So what I want to leave you with really is thinking about how vetting as one element of a human reliability program fits into a human reliability program. How a human reliability program is dependent upon how it's led and the culture of the organization. And then give some thought to that, and then let's have a discussion about it, please, and raise your questions in the chat function. Thank you, Chris.
Great, thanks very much, George, and thanks to all the panelists for keeping it to time. We actually have quite a bit of time for discussion, I think, which is really good. So again, if you have any questions, do please pop them in the Q&A or raise your hand and we can see if we can unmute you so you can ask your question yourself. I'm just going to kick it off with a couple of questions to get us going. The first one actually relates to definitions of insider threats, and I think Chrissy showed a very useful definition on her first slide. Specifically, I'd be interested in getting the panelists' thoughts in terms of whether insider threat definitions also include unintentional acts, or should they be focused on acts which are underpinned by malicious intent? Chrissy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought your definition perhaps encompassed both of those. Well, I think maybe for others, unintentional acts would be more weaknesses in security culture. And related to that, does it matter in terms of how we define it? So again, maybe Chrissy, if I give you the chance first to respond or sort of clarify your definition, and then we can move on to some of the other panelists.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Chris. My working definition does include intentional as well as unintentional activities. And the reason why I find this important to include is the fact that individuals can actually cause quite grave damage unintentionally without maliciousness involved. We've seen this in a variety of different industries where individuals have, for whatever reason, circumvented specific policies or procedures. So perhaps they didn't know there was a change in rule, and the lack of knowledge, the lack of information, or perhaps inadequate training, awareness, and education from an organization actually facilitated that unintentional behavior. I think this is why it's important to include unintentional activities within our security culture programs, right? It's not just about mitigating or minimizing theft of information or material, but it's about education, awareness, and prevention writ large. Welcome thoughts from my esteemed panelists.
Great, thanks very much, Chrissy. So would anyone else like to jump in? Do you agree with Chrissy? Would you sort of frame it slightly differently? George, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm not muted, yeah. The IAA defines it as unintentional and effectively intentional. And I think in the latest edition of 8G 2020, they actually talk about adversary and unwitting, which is making a separation as opposed to active, and then develop into active, passive, and violent, non-violent, and the like. I feel slight unease defining an insider as anything other than malicious, because I think intent is so critical to this, and it's the way that the design basis threat, for example, is articulated in terms of motivations, intention, and capabilities in broad terms. And I think it also perhaps suggests that a single error by what one might call the useful idiot, who's accepted a phishing email or something like that and opened up a vulnerability, could lead to a really significant compromise. One would hope that there would be sufficient levels of security, both in the cyberspace or in the physical space, perhaps, in terms of defense in depth, so that one unintentional error does not have such a significant impact. If that is the case, well, then it's a fault of the wider system than it is necessarily the individual. And I think it's, certainly I've been on the end of phishing attacks, organized by our own organization, actually, as a bit of red teaming and the like, and I've fallen for them on one occasion. It's not nice then to have a tag of being told you're an insider threat because you've fallen to the prey of one phishing email. So I do think I'm slightly at ease with it, but I think the most important point actually is not necessarily the definition, but to determine that you can deal with the potential consequences of it, and making sure that there are other preventative and protective measures in place. So that if somebody does make that error at the beginning of a fault chain, it can be picked up and rectified and mitigated further down the fault chain.
Very good. Thanks, George. So slightly different perspective on it there. Cheryl, I see your hand is up.
Yes. I fully support the comments, the panelist, and this is where I think ongoing security culture is key. Making sure, you have the necessary training, awareness, making sure your employees have got the tools and techniques and know what to look out for. There's, like Christine mentioned, unwitting insiders, following on from what I was saying, pressures with COVID, you know, people's minds could be elsewhere. You know, it's quite easy just to get an email and you think, oh, right, I'll just click on that link, and it could be a phishing email, you know, if they're not giving it the true full attention. I think it's good when companies do little scenarios as well. You know, they might send a phishing email to the organisation just to see how many hits the staff give it, just to do a test, so that they know where to focus the training. They can roll out some tailored training to the employees. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Kyrul, anything from yourself on this one, or should we move on?
Okay, go ahead, Chris. But I would like to answer the question from the chat. So about the importance of the leadership. I think in the IAEA Nuclear Security Series number 7 mentioned that there are 8 characteristics of the leadership. So that is important, for example, like use of his authority or her authority. And also you can see that how to leader make a decision. He has to involving the staff to make decision process, and also conduct management oversight, visit the people, employees work on the ground, and also make effective communication. There are several characteristics of the leader, but this is very difficult. But he has to remind the leader that he has to implement it. So once he has conducted this, so put in the system management, and that can quite answer my I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. No, thanks for moving us on, you know, rapidly to the next question, because I think there is a few there now. So yeah, so we're moving on to talk about importance of leadership, which several of the speakers touched on, both when it comes to insider threat mitigation, but also development of robust security culture programs. Would anyone else like to sort of jump in on that? I know people have spoken to it a little bit. I mean, potentially thinking on some of the, I guess, practical steps or characteristics of good leaders when it comes to security culture, or embedding a culture of security, or launching of effective insider threat mitigation programs. Who would like to go first on that? Maybe just some sort of key characteristics or lessons from your own practitioner experiences. George, I think you're unmuted, so I'm gonna hand over to you first. Go ahead.
Is that me, Chris?
Yeah.
Sorry, is that me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, my views on leadership. I think, in short, an organization over time will take on the character of its leader or its leaders, which is why I think it's really important to distinguish between the function that managers have and the function that leaders have. Leaders are there to demonstrate, to inspire, to cajole, to reinforce an emotional connection with the workforce. What managers do is they implement procedures and processes and things like that, and then they assure them and the like. And in that sense, leaders are there to provide the vision and the route to get to that vision and that objective. And what managers do is they implement the processes and procedures on that route to that vision. And that's why I think it's so important that leaders lead in any environment, frankly, but in terms of mitigating the insider threat and determining the vetting levels appropriate and determining the substance of the human reliability program and how that's implemented and integrated across an organization is absolutely key. And leaders can be in place at any level. The point about a human reliability program, for example, is as a program, it's a program of constituent parts which should be stitched together into a coherent and coordinated fashion, integrated across the organization. If that doesn't occur, it's not a program. It's simply a series of activities which are unconnected, perhaps. And that takes leadership. And it takes people to demonstrate their advocacy and their commitment to that particular program and to the objectives of the program. And a lot of that will only come through the emotional connection that leaders have with their followers, who have the responsibility for implementing what the leader has determined is important, in simple terms. And so that's why I think it will all, from my perspective, and you know, people should challenge it. from my perspective, it'll always be the leadership function, which is the most single important critical element of any of these aspects, frankly, whether it's insider threat or whether it's mitigating a physical attack or whatever it is. It all comes down to good leadership at the end of the day.
Great, thanks very much, George. If no one else is going to jump in, and then I see Chrissy has put something in the chat in terms of some key characteristics around leadership when it comes to security culture. I want to move on to, I think, something Cheryl mentioned in her presentation, which relates to perhaps some of the overlap and differences between safety culture and security culture in the nuclear industry. And here, I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, safety culture is in many organizations is more well embedded, while security culture is this relatively recent thing that has been promoted within the industry. I'd be just curious to hear from any of the panelists in terms of what they see as the synergies or potential sort of overlaps between programs that are designed to sort of set up to promote safety culture and those that are set up to promote security culture. Is it possible to leverage sort of one to the other? So again, can you build on some of this procedures or approaches aimed at developing safety culture and leverage it for the development of security culture program? Or would you see these as quite you know, distinct? Do you think about the possibility of sort of integrated culture across safety and security here as well? So again, a number of questions there, and if anyone would like to comment on it, do feel free. Who would like to take that on? Kyril, over to you. You're the security culture.
Yes, thank you, Chris. We in Bataan has an experience when we start to make brainstorming workshop harmonized safety and security culture in 2016. So as you know, in 2012, we did self-assessment on nuclear security culture. So since then, our colleague from safety culture also would like to do so. So in order to make harmonize between safety and security culture, we invite the international expert to come to Indonesia to conduct brainstorming workshop, safety and security. We learn from the safety culture self-assessment. As we know, that self-assessment of safety culture starts from 1990s, I think, and we would like to learn from their experience. But in 2016, we conduct together, and we make several panels and speaker from the nuclear safety culture division, and also from nuclear security culture. And we provide the report, and we continue in 2018. What we found in our panel finding is that there are several steps, around 6 steps to make the harmonize between safety and security culture. And Bataan is already in the 4th step, mean that understanding. And we need to feedback to collaboration between safety and security. What we did is, once the safety what we call it workshop, he has to invite the security culture to make sure what is the security activities, and then safety people can understand about security culture. So that kind of activities that we did. So in 2018, we start to invite new employees to the training on the safety and security culture, where the lecture is coming from safety and security. That's what we did in Bataan since 2018. Thank you, Chris.
Great, thanks very much, Kyril. Chrissy, did you want to come in on this?
Yes, I just really appreciate Mr. Kyril's comments regarding the relationships between safety and security, especially in regards to self-assessment. There are 2 pieces of that I'd just like to call upon that I think really underscore the importance and the value of good leaders and quality leadership within an organization. And those are the safety principles wherein every person, every one of us is responsible for ensuring safe operations. And being able to do that requires an organization that supports a questioning attitude. And that questioning, supportive attitude is actually cultivated, it's inspired, it's encouraged. And there are mechanisms and tools in place that allow for that to happen. We see that in insider threat programs and behavioral observation programs, where there might be anonymous ways in which an individual can seek help for something that they've observed in the workplace. And the second one is that hazards and risks are identified every task, every time, and that staff are able to raise those concerns. They feel empowered to do that. And that kind of trust then can permeate throughout an organization.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chrissy. Cheryl, I see your hands up, but there's a question actually that's appeared in the chat from Richard Asser. I wonder if it might be possible to bring Richard in to ask his question. Richard, are you still with us? Let me.
Yes, I'm with you.
Hi, Richard. Yeah, we can hear you now. Please do ask your question.
Yeah. Good morning, and I'm sorry I had to join in a bit late. I had my question has to do with vetting. Since my background is in HR, I wanted to get to know more on some methods that are applicable specifically for developing countries. What I mean by this, we do our normal vetting in HR, which includes some certificate audit, background checks and all that. But then the focus is not towards nuclear security or safeguarding insider threat, because it has been a certain practice that we lapse a bit when it comes to looking out for candidates that could possess the ability or capacity to cause some threats within our organization. For us in Ghana, we've not experienced such a threat for some good reason, and our recruitment is quite stringent. For you to get into the commission is quite stringent. You need to go through interviews, and there are promotional interviews and vetting and all throughout. But then I listening through, and I would appreciate some kind of further information on how this insider threat could be guarded specifically with regards to developing countries like Ghana, where I come from. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Richard. Over to any of our panelists on that. If I understood it correctly, it was this sort of question and challenge of how do you develop these sort of insider threat HR related processes when you don't necessarily have that sort of baseline in terms of past instances and threats that have occurred, in your country. What can you draw on to develop those processes? Would anyone like to take that question on?
That's correct. That's exactly what I mean.
Kyrul, I'm going to go to you first. If we're developing a nuclear country, albeit one that has, a lot of experience now in terms of developing these programs, please.
Yes, thank you. Just full of HR. Hello? Can you hear me, please?
Sorry, Chris, you're muted.
Try and fix that. So, Kyrul, if you just mute yourself. Here we go. George, do you want to go first while we work on Kyrul's sound?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback somewhere, but I'll just say a few words and then invite Cheryl perhaps to reflect on this. Richard, I would go back to identify the requirement in the first instance and define who needs to be vetted based upon what access they need to what material in terms of physical access or to what data they need. And then in terms of a graded approach is determine who needs to be cleared to what level of access, which in the UK we would relate to a security level of classification as well. And then try and minimize that to those who have a need to access and those who have a need to know. You know, based upon a principle of least application in a sense, that would give you a tiered framework in terms of what access levels need to be permitted and what vetting needs to be done, because certainly from a UK perspective, as you get higher up the vetting levels, one would expect reasonably that there to be fewer people who need access. It should be a pyramid with the tip at the top as opposed to an inverted pyramid with the tip at the bottom. And that's because vetting is intrusive and not everybody wants to be vetted to the highest levels of security clearance, and it's expensive as well. And as I said in my early pitch, that it can be introduced vulnerabilities as well. And so in the UK, lower level vetting is conducted by the organization. Higher level vetting is conducted by national agencies. But Cheryl, do you have any comment to elaborate on that?
Yeah, fully support your comments there, George. You know, the key is not to over vet your people, and it's all about the graded approach. So the first thing is to determine what level of access the individual requires, and then you can tailor your vetting and do the tiered approach that George mentioned. You know, in terms of like the basic checks, you could introduce like your reference checks from like previous employers, do a character reference check as well. You know, all that brings together a picture of the candidate. You know, you're going off the past experience, and that all helps against your insider threat program. You know, and if any concerns are raised from one of the references, you know, you could always phone like a previous employer just to see if they may elaborate on that a bit further for you. You know, all the checks are all vital. You could do. I mean, I'm not sure what your setup's like and where you're based, but you could do online checks. You know, check social media. These are open source checks you can do. LinkedIn. You know, you can check someone's background. It's all information that's readily available there for you. It just helps you to build up a picture of the individual. And then once someone's actually employed within your organisation, it's all factors in your ongoing aftercare then. So you could do like annual security appraisals. If you do have concerns, you can make them more frequent, do them every 3-6 months. All helps to mitigate the insider threat.
Great, thanks very much, Cheryl. We're going to go back to Cairo now and see if that sound issue has been sorted. Cairo, over to you.
Okay, Chris, thank you. Thank you, Richard, for the question. As you know, that Indonesia also trying to implement HRP, or what we call it in NSCP 225 trustworthiness, to make them are really clear by us. So then we combine between HRP that we got from DOA and also with vetting from the UK during the workshop. And then we created what we call it Indonesian Hrp. So because we have to compliance with the national regulation as well as the national culture as well. So this we create a questionnaire about 11 aspects, starting from loyalty of the employee to the nation and their ideology, about constitution, nationalist insights and nationalism, and also about the extremists, and nuclear safety and nuclear security perspective, health, drug use and liquor, financial responsibility, honesty behavior, criminal acts against law, and social responsibility, emotional strength and weaknesses. Around 11 questions that we deliver to the candidate HRP in Batam. So I think we call it this Indonesian HRP, that because we combine from the international good practices. So that's my comment from Richard. Thank you, Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. I know we're going slightly over time here, but I see people are sticking with us in terms of attendees. So maybe we'll just go for just a few more minutes, because I do see that Hassani, Amos, you've got your hand up as well. So we can, do you want to ask your question? Let's just try and unmute you. Hassani, are you still with us? Possibly still muted. Sally, I don't know if we can unmute Hassani.
Yeah, I have tried to. I've sent him a request to do so. Normally he should be able to do it.
Richard has his hand raised as well.
Oh, I think Hassani, you're unmuted now. Do you want to ask your question? Although this could be a connection issue, so feel free to pop it in the chat if not. Richard, did you have any come back just in the meantime to the comments from the panelists?
You want me to come back?
Yeah, just if you had any follow, I see your hand was still up. So
Yes, it's a follow up to Carol. What Carol was saying. I gathered from what he said quite eligibly that one of the things that we do for us at HR with the commission is to incorporate some practices into a competency framework. But then he's given me a lot of enlightenment that a security culture could be sort of incorporated also into competency requirements as part of performance appraisal. That's an observation I wanted to get across. Thank you.
okay, great. Thanks, Richard. Hassani, one more chance to see if that sound is working. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap the session up.
Can Hassani put it in the chat?
That's possible as well. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to quite manage it today, but not to worry. Do feel free to get in touch with us with your question. We can pass it on to the panelists and maybe address it via email. I guess we'll wrap up now as we're sort of 10 minutes over time. So again, a big thanks to all of our panelists today for sharing their views on these important issues. Big thanks to everyone for attending the session as well, and we hope you enjoyed it. As noted at the start, we'd love to hear your feedback after this, so we'll be sending around a very short survey. If you can take the time to fill it in so we can improve future sessions, that would be really great. Also, for those of you that have attended the Nuclear Security Culture Programs workshops in the past, we do really want to keep in touch and see how you're doing. And you may well find a reminder from us if you attended a course over the last couple of years, containing an impact survey, which we do send around periodically. So again, if you do receive one of those, it will be really helpful for us if you can fill that in and get it back to us. And then just finally, in terms of the next webinar in this